The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Well, it is Friday on Armed Radio, and this is Betrayal. And I'm your host, Casey, for another true crime, history, mystery, flippity-floppity things. Okay, so our show for today is going to be kind of, I guess, a November classic type show, I would call it. We're going to be talking about JFK's assassination. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to include some historical words from the man himself, JFK. On November 22nd, 1963, he traveled from Washington, D.C. to Fort Worth, Texas. He gave a speech in Fort Worth, then flew to Dallas to the Love Field. There, he took a motorcade through downtown Dallas, at that time, he was shot, taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital, which, Parkland Memorial Hospital is going to be, if it's not already, torn down, and they were getting rid of some of their hospital items. And I've got, from that era, 2 hospital chairs from a room, and also I guess it's a table that you can slide underneath the bed. We've got at least 2 of those, I believe, from Parkland Hospital, and some other artifacts from Parkland Hospital before they imploded the building to build a brand new one. If he had not been shot, he was supposed to go to there is a place called the World, I think it's like the World Trade Center or something Mart. My prom in 1994 was held there. It's a interesting building and everything. So, actually it was held there. In fact, if I remember correctly, if you look at the old videos of JFK's, or the people who were actually waiting on JFK who didn't know that he'd been shot, you can see the levels above there. So it was held into, I guess, the main area where he would have given his speech. That room is where I had my prom. And so from that speech at the Trade Center in Dallas, off of Stemmons, he was supposed to travel down to San Antonio, and then back up to Washington. Unfortunately, things did not work out that way. He did give the speech in Dallas, in Fort Worth, and in fact, you could still go into this building in downtown Fort Worth, and it pretty much relatively looks the same as it did back in that time. There are noticeable differences, but overall it looks the same. And you can kind of drive a route that he took to the airport, which would have been a military base in Fort Worth, to fly over to Love Field. And Fort Worth has a lot of history. In fact, there's a couple places where Martin Luther King stayed that are still, they literally look like they're frozen in time. The neighborhood looks the same, the building looks the same, some of the interior of the building looks the same. It's that crazy. It's that sameness. So I'm going to play JFK's last speech from Fort Worth, Texas, because really and truly, this was his last speech, because in a few hours' time that it took him to get over to Love Field, which was not very long, he gave, he was shaking hands. He didn't really give a speech at Love Field because he was on a schedule to get to the Mart off of Stemmons through downtown. And I believe he is the last president to have an open motorcade. From that point on, all presidents had to have a covered, bulletproof motorcade. And that's why whenever you see the presidential inaugurations or anything like that, when the president, he doesn't walk the full route of the parade, he gets out for just a short bit of time, and during that time, the Secret Service are literally chewing their fingernails off because it is such nerve-wrackingness, because it is so hard to protect a key asset of the United States, the president, when they're open and basically they're a target. So they have snipers on the building, as well as undercover police officers, as well as the Secret Service are surrounding those people. Because what you have is during a presidential inauguration, you have the vice president, you have the president, you have all members of the House and Senate. I believe one person from each house sits out, because if something happens to all of them, you've got at least one person who can take up the mantle of being in charge of the United States. Of course, I don't know how effective that would be, because people would be freaking out if that were to happen. If you've ever watched the movie, what is it called? Oh gosh, Mars Attacks. It's by oh gosh, Tim Burton. It's funny, but literally the Martians, okay, it's not funny if it happened in real life, but in the movie, it is funny. Movie funny, real life bad. In the movie, the Martians, vaporize the president, the first lady. They blow up the White House. They blow up the Capitol. They basically vaporize the House and the Senate and everything else. And it's left to Natalie Portman, who's the president's daughter, who becomes basically the president as a teenager. Funny movie, bad in real life. I have to clarify that, because some people are just very hypersensitive, and they're like, oh my gosh, you're wishing peril onto your government. No, I'm not wishing peril onto my government. That would be bad. That's like crossing the streams bad. That's a Ghostbuster reference, by the way, if you didn't catch that. But here's some of his speech. It is about 17 minutes long, his speech. And I thought it'd be important to hear it. It's history. A lot of people don't hear these kind of things. And if you ever have a chance, you can see the video of it. And it's pretty interesting. But basically, as he's going down Elm Street, which, goodness gracious, Elm Street, years later we would know that from Freddy Krueger, but at the time, Elm Street, you might as well called it First Street, but nowadays, Elm Street is not just a tree, it's like a horror movie, but it's also the same street that he was assassinated. Today, if you were going down to Dealey Plaza to look at Elm Street, the fence, which is the green lawn, the 6-story, which is a museum in the actual building, if you walk down the sidewalk, because it is a actual street that cars go down, because it's a one-way, the same one-way it was back in the 1960s. If you walk down, there is a marker in the road that will tell you where the shot was fired, where it hit. And you can look up at the book depository, and you kind of look around Dealey Plaza. There's tours at it's called the 6th Floor Museum, which has a lot of artifacts. And in fact, it has an area closed off to where he was stationed And this is, you know, Oswald was stationed. And then you can actually walk or drive around to where the police station where Ruby was killed, where Oswald was killed, and then eventually Ruby was killed. A lot of historical, aspects in that city. As we know from this year, I mean, we've talked about Bonnie and Clyde from Dallas-Fort Worth, who are buried in Dallas-Fort Worth, who ran the streets all over, North Texas, from, John F. Kennedy being assassinated to, oh my gosh, there's just so much history. It is just chock full of history. So if you ever had a chance to get down here to Texas, you might want to go check out some of those historical places that you can actually physically see. It's worth your time to see about that. Even if you're not an American, you're maybe from the UK or something, take an opportunity to experience the history and immerse yourself in it. It's quite an interesting thing. It's kind of like when we go to the, to the UK, we immerse ourselves in your history, and it's quite interesting. So, also, I didn't have a chance to update you guys because literally it was breaking news as we were doing the show. It was literally breaking news. But Rodney Reed, the man who was supposed to be executed on the 20th, which is Wednesday, he got a stay of execution. Honestly, you guys, I don't know how he pulled that rabbit out of his hat because I honestly, everything was not going in his direction. I'm telling you, his appeals, his asking to have his evidence reviewed, all these things were just decline. And then all of a sudden, some parole situation or a court of paroles or something, I guess, had more power, who was like one step below, I guess, the governor. They basically came in and stayed his execution. It didn't even make it up to the governor. Intervened and said, whoa, we are stopping this execution indefinitely. That's big. That's huge, you guys. So, whether Reed is going to spend the rest of his life in jail or his case is going to be reheard and he's going to be exonerated, or they're going to find out that it was the fiancé who was actually the killer who pinned it on an innocent person, because it was back in the 80s and 90s, we called it jungle love because, people who, liked outside, or they called it the swirl, which is chocolate and vanilla, the swirl. And that would be blacks and whites, dating. Now, there are people who are intimate in this. I guess Stykes has a daughter who's an adult. She wants all this to go away because it's just for her reliving a traumatic experience. I don't know how old she would have been at the time. I didn't even know she had a daughter, but I guess she did. So it probably means she was a teenage. She had a daughter as a teenager or in high school. So a young mother, so to speak. They claimed that Stykes was very much in love with her fiancé and was happy to be getting married. So for her to be cheating on him like days before her wedding does not seem like her. I don't know. I mean, there's some movies out there where, stuff can be going down where she pretends like she's happy because she doesn't know how to get us out of a situation, but she's really cheating on the man. It's possible that people cheat on each other right before their wedding. I mean, there's people who cheat on their wedding night. There's all kinds of things who look like they're really, really happy. There are people who end up committing suicide who look like they're like, oh my gosh, this person was so happy, there was this. It's a front to disguise what's going on. I don't know. So there's a lot of things that are going on in this story, a lot of moving parts, but right now it looks like he's not going to be I'm sorry. I think for some reason my days are off. For some reason, he got a stay of execution indefinitely so that they can review over the information that they're being presented. Kanye West, Kim Kardashian West, was in communication with this man. Kanye West gave a concert at the Bastrop prison where he's located at, and then went off to Joel Osteen's mega church in Houston. A lot of things, Beyonce and everything like that. I don't know if they would have done it if it was a person of a different color, a different gender. Well, maybe, I don't know. It just seems like they come out of the woodwork for certain cases, but other ones, it's silence. I don't know. I just find it very odd. And I think it's just more or less they're serving their own purposes rather than they're serving other people. It's good publicity. It's damn good publicity. I mean, seriously. You can't buy this kind of good publicity. Do they need good publicity? I mean, they're pretty damn famous on their own. So, I mean, maybe their heart's in the right place. Maybe it's for the fame. Maybe it's to keep their name in the presses. I don't know. You be the judge on that one. I just threw that out there. But here is some information. This is JFK's speech. Then we're going to go to the press learning that something's going on. We don't know what's going on. JFK's been allegedly shot or something's going on. And so we're going to go into that and then kind of, cap it off. So, okay, well, here's JFK's speech.
Our hearts and our arms are open to you. May God bless you and cause His light to shine on you and on your companions and your family. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the President of the United States.
I know now why everyone in Texas, Fort Worth, is so thin, having gotten up and down about 9 times. This is what you do every morning. Mr. Buck, Mr. Vice President, Governor Conley, Senator Yarborough, Jim Wright, members of the congressional delegation, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. 2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas. Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear. I'm glad to be here in Jim Wright City. About 35 years ago, a congressman from California, just been elected, received a letter from an irate constituent which said, during your campaign you promised to have the Sierra Madre Mountains reforested. You've been in office for 1 month and you haven't done so. Well, no one in Fort Worth has been that unreasonable, but in some ways he has had the Sierra Madre Mountains reforested. And here in Fort Worth, he's contributed to its growth. He speaks for Fort Worth. He speaks for the country. And I don't know any city that's better represented in the Congress of the United States than Fort Worth. And if there are any Democrats here this morning, I'm sure you won't hold that against them. 3 years ago, last September, I came here on the Vice President and spoke at Burke Burnett Park. And I called in that speech for a national security policy and a national security system which was second to none. A position which said not first but, if, when, and how, but first. That city responded to that call as it has through its history. And we have been putting that pledge into practice ever since. And I want to say a word about that pledge here in Fort Worth, which understands national defense and its importance to the security of the United States. During the days of the Indian War, this city was a fort. During the days of World War I, even before the United States got into the war, Royal Canadian Air Force pilots were training here. During the days of World War II, the great Liberator bombers, on which my brother flew with his co-pilot from this city, were produced here. First non-stop flight around the world took off and returned here in a plane built in factories here. The first truly intercontinental bomber, the B-36, was produced here. The B-58, which is the finest weapon system in the world today, which it demonstrated most recently in flying from Tokyo to London with an average speed of nearly 1,000 miles per hour, is a Fort Worth product. The Iroquois helicopter from Fort Worth is a mainstay in our fight against the guerrillas in South Vietnam. The transportation of crews between our missile sites is done in planes produced here in Fort Worth. So wherever the confrontation may occur, and in the last 3 years it's occurred at least 3 occasions, in Laos, in Berlin, and in Cuba, and it will again, wherever it occurs, the products of Fort Worth and the men of Fort Worth provide us with a sense of security. And in the not-too-distant future, a new Fort Worth product. And I'm glad that there was a table separating Mr. Hicks and myself, a new Fort Worth product. The TFX, Tactical Fighter Experimental. Nobody knows what those words mean, but that's what they mean. Tactical Fighter Experimental will serve the forces of freedom and will be the #1 airplane in the world today. There's been a good deal of discussion of the long and hard-fought competition to win the TFX contract, but very little discussion about what this plane will do. It will be the first operational aircraft ever produced that can literally spread its wings through the air. It will thus give us a single plane capable of carrying out missions of speed as well as distance, able to fly very far in one form or very fast in another. It can take off from rugged, short airstrips, enormously increasing the Air Force's ability to participate in limited wars. The same basic plane will serve the Navy's carriers, saving the taxpayers at least $1 billion in cost if they built separate planes for the Navy and the Air Force. The government of Australia, by purchasing $125 million of TFX planes before they are even off the drawing board, has already testified to the merit of this plane, and at the same time, it's confident in the ability of Fort Worth to meet its schedule. In all these ways, the success of our national defense depends upon this city in the western United States, 10,000 miles from Vietnam, 5,000 or 6,000 miles from Berlin, thousands of miles from troubled spots in Latin America, in Africa, or the Middle East. And yet Fort Worth and what it does and what it produces participates in all these great historic events. Texas as a whole and Fort Worth bear particular responsibility for this national defense effort. For military procurement in this state totals nearly $1.25 billion, fifth highest among all the states of the Union. There are more military personnel on active duty in this state than any in the nation save one. And it's not Massachusetts. Any in the nation save one with a combined military-civilian defense payroll of well over $1 billion. I don't recite these for any partisan purpose. They're the result of American determination to be second to none. And as a result of the effort which this country has made in the last 3 years, we are second to none. In the past 3 years, we have increased the defense budget of the United States by over 20%, increased the program of acquisition for Polaris submarines from 24 to 41, increased our Minuteman missile purchase program by more than 75%, doubled the number of strategic bombers and missiles on alert, doubled the number of nuclear weapons available in the strategic alert forces, increased the tactical nuclear forces deployed in Western Europe by over 60%, added 5 combat-ready divisions to the armies of the United States and 5 tactical fighter wings to the Air Force of the United States, increased our strategic airlift capability by 75%, and increased our special counterinsurgency forces, which are engaged now in South Vietnam, by 600%. I hope those who want a strong America and place it on some signs will also place those figures next to it. This is not an easy effort. This requires sacrifice by the people of the United States. But this is a very dangerous and uncertain world. As I said earlier, on 3 occasions in the last 3 years, the United States has had a direct confrontation. No one can say when it will come again. No one expects that our life will be easy. Certainly not in this decade, and perhaps not in this century. But we should realize what a burden and responsibility the people of the United States have borne for so many years. Here, a country which lived in isolation, divided and protected by the Atlantic and the Pacific, uninterested in the struggles of the world around it. Here, in the short space of 18 years after the Second World War, we put ourselves by our own will and by necessity into defensive alliances with countries all around the globe. Without the United States, South Vietnam would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the SEATO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the CENTO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, there would be no NATO, and gradually Europe would drift into neutralism and indifference. Without the effort of the United States and the Alliance for Progress, the communist advance onto the mainland of South America would long ago have taken place. So this country, which desires only to be free, which desires to be secure, which desires to live at peace for 18 years under 3 different administrations, has borne more than its share of the burden, has stood watch for more than its number of years. I don't think that we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. The communist balance of power is still strong. The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone in the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty. And the people of Texas will be in the lead. So I'm glad to come. I'm glad to come to this state, which has played such a significant role in so many efforts in this century, and to say that here in Fort Worth, you people will be playing a major role in the maintenance of the security of the United States for the next 10 years. I'm confident, as I look to the future, that our chances for security, our chances for peace, are better than they've been in the past. And the reason is because we're stronger. And with that strength is a determination to not only maintain the peace, but also the vital interests of the United States. To that great cause, Texas and the United States are committed. Thank you.
Mr. President, your visit with us in Fort Worth today, the things you have said have refreshed and renewed our appreciation of your great leadership and courage. You have brought rain to moisten our pastures and our fields. You have brought sunshine in our hearts. We know that you don't wear a hat. We couldn't let you leave Fort Worth without providing you with some protection against the rain.
I'll put it on in the White House on Monday. If you'll come up there, you'll have a chance to see it then.
That Texas hat is presented to you by Washer Brothers, one of the oldest men's stores in Texas. And to protect you against local enemies in the manner that you are protecting this nation against our foreign enemies, and to keep the rattlesnakes on Vice President Johnson's ranch from striking you, we want to present this pair of boots. We won't ask you to put them on. Here. The boots are presented by Mr. John Justin, former mayor of Fort Worth, manufacturer of the most walked-about boots in the world. And Mrs. Kennedy, as you ride to the hounds or walk to the rattlesnakes, we want you to have protection too.
So, if you were hearing, Fort Worth presented John F. Kennedy with a cowboy hat, which you can still get that cowboy type hat. It's a felt cowboy hat, and some Justin boots. And Justin Boots does use the logo Most Walked About Boots in Texas. And Justin Boots, you can still get Justin Boots in Fort Worth, in Texas. I mean, they're everywhere there. Now, saying protection because it was a rainy day that became suddenly sunny out, and of course, there is a saying in Texas, if you don't like the weather, wait a few minutes. I believe in the UK and London, they have an equal saying as well, saying if you don't like the weather in London, wait a few minutes, it will change. So everyone carries an umbrella in London, whereas in Texas, I mean, you'd have to carry everything from a winter jacket to shorts to a t-shirt, and everything in between, because our weather can go that bipolar. I mean, I remember in 1994, right after I graduated, or right before I graduated. I think I was still in school at the time, so it must have been right before I graduated. I went to school in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and it was the weirdest thing. A cold front went through in like May, which is like, that does not happen. A cold front went through. It started to snow around lunchtime. So all of us who were in shorts and t-shirts, no jacket, and flip-flops and all those kind of things, we were cold. And it lasted until like midnight. Then all of a sudden, boom. I mean, huge warming streak. The next day we were in shorts and t-shirts again. So we went to school in shorts and t-shirts. We had snow on the ground, snow and ice on the ground by 3 p.m. to midnight. By midnight, everything started thawing. By the morning, it was 70 degrees, and we were back in shorts and t-shirts. Fluke thing, hasn't happened since, but it did happen. It's just like these cold snaps right now. We have like, we've been cold, we're warm, we're cold, we're warm. It's just Texas weather. So they made a funniness out of it by saying protection from the elements outside, because it was raining outside. And when John F. Kennedy said, "I'll wear this on Monday at the White House," the cowboy hat, because he didn't put it on. Unfortunately, when he went back to Washington, D.C., he was in a box, in a makeshift pine box that they had to get from the nearest funeral home because he was dead. And his poor wife, in her pink outfit that we all have seen with her pink pillbox hat, was covered in his blood. And she kept herself in that outfit when she could have changed, because she's like, I want the world to see what they did to my husband. Now, the reason why they joked about the late Mrs. Kennedy, which is kind of interesting because she would have been, the late Mrs. Kennedy as a widow that evening. She knew about the affairs that John F. Kennedy was having. She knew about the Marilyn Monroe affair. She knew about multiple affairs that he was having. And she was up in the hotel room, which they still have all that furniture. And basically, she was not a happy camper. She didn't want to go downstairs and be all friendly and cheerful. She was not a happy camper. But because she was the president's wife, she had to suck it up, put a smile on her face, and go down and pretend like nothing was a problem, that she wasn't pissed at her husband, that she didn't know about the affairs that were continually going on, there and in front of her and everything. I mean, she was pregnant and he was having an affair on her. So she had to put on a face and kind of go out there and be Miss Charming. And so he kind of joked it off, like, this is the late Mrs. Kennedy, that was just the time of the 60s. But as we know, the progression of the 60s was a bloody freaking era. Now, the 2000s, the mid-2000s, this time, the 1999 till now, we are truly becoming a bloody era right here of just chaos and terrorism and shooting each other. I mean, there was another Walmart shooting in Oklahoma, for God's sakes. And that's not the only time. We're just shooting them up. Just like, it reminds me of when the mobs were around, where people were doing these drive-by shootings. We are in a flipping, violent time. More so violent. I mean, I guess the 80s and 90s was not as violent as what I'm seeing today. Or maybe it wasn't covered like it is nowadays. That could be a huge indicator there. But what happens is that Mr. John F. K., his wife, Governor Conley and all this, and his vice president, his vice president, all get in a car because it's raining. They drive through the streets of Fort Worth to the Air Force Base. Or actually, it's called a naval base. I can't think of what the naval base is called. It's still there. It's still working. It's not Shepherd's. I don't know. Fort Worth Naval Base. I don't know what it's called. I can't remember it. And I've been on that base many times. I cannot recall it. There's a couple bases here. Some of them are shut down, but they're still there. Just empty. No civilians are on there. I guess it's like decommissioned. They're just empty bases. Homeless people and animals are probably there. I don't know if military are guarding it. I have no idea. But I've been on a couple of those places that are now closed down bases. But this one is open still. And he